The Allies feel strain of the Afghanistan War. The troop levels among issues dividing the U.S. NATO countries. Washington. The U.S. plan to send an additional 3,200 Marines to troubled southern Afghanistan this spring reflects the Pentagon's belief that if it can't bully its NATO allies into sending more troops to the Afghan front, perhaps it can possibly shame them into doing so, U.S. officials said. But the immediate reaction to the proposed deployment from NATO partners fighting alongside U.S. forces was that it was about time the United States stepped up its own effort. After more than 6 years of coalition warfare in Afghanistan, NATO is a bundle of frayed nerves and tension over nearly every aspect of the conflict. They're tired, they're worn out, including troop levels and missions, reconstruction, anti-narcotics efforts, and even counterinsurgency strategy. Stress has grown along with casualties, domestic pressures, and a sense that the war is not improving. According to a wide range of senior U.S. and NATO member officials who agreed to discuss sensitive alliance issues. While Washington has long called for allies to send more forces, NATO countries involved in some of the fiercest fighting have complained that they are suffering the heaviest losses. The United States supplies about half of the 54,000 foreign troops in Afghanistan. They say that the British, Canadians, and Dutch are engaged in regular combat in the volatile South. We have 1/10 of the troops, and we do more fighting than you do. A Canadian official said of his country's 2,500 troops in Kandahar province. So do the Dutch. The Canadian death rate, proportional to the overall size of its force, is much higher than that of U.S. troops in Afghanistan or Iraq, a Canadian government analysis concluded last year. British officials note that the eastern region, where most U.S. forces are based, is much far quieter than the Taliban-saturated center of British operations and Helmand, the country's top opium-producing province. The American rejoinder, spoken only in private with references to British operations in both Iraq and Afghanistan, is that supposedly superior U.S. skills have made it so. A very sharp divide. NATO has long been divided between those with fighting forces in Afghanistan and those who have restricted their involvement to non-combat activities. Now, as the United States begins a slow drawdown from Iraq, the attention of even combat partners has turned toward whether more U.S. troops will be free to fight in the forgotten war in Afghanistan. When Canadian Foreign Minister Maxime Bernier visited Washington late last month, he reminded Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice that Canada's Afghan mandate expires in January 2009, with most of the Canadian public opposed to a continued combat role. He said, "It is not certain that Ottawa can sustain it." Bernier's message was that his minority government could make a better case at home if the United States would boost its own efforts in Afghanistan, according to Canadian U.S. officials familiar with the conversation. I don't think he expected an express commitment that day that they would draw down in Iraq and buttress in Afghanistan, the Canadian official said, but he certainly registered Canadian interest and that of the allies involved. According to public opinion polls, Canadians feel they have done their bit in Afghanistan. Prime Minister Stephen Harper last fall named an independent commission to study options, continuing the combat mission, redeploying to more peaceful regions, or withdrawing in January 2009. The Commission report due this month will form the basis of an upcoming parliamentary debate, with a Taliban offensive expected in the spring, along with another record opium poppy crop. The new Marines will deploy to the British area in Helmand and will be available to augment Canadian forces in neighboring Kandahar. Both the United States President and Defense Secretary Robert M. Gates have toned down their public pressure on allies. Although Gates began a meeting of NATO defense ministers late last year by saying he would not let them off the hook for their responsibilities in Afghanistan, he said at a news conference at the end of the session that further public criticism was not productive, or something like that. Still, the Defense Department hopes that increasing its own contribution, nearly half of an additional 7,500 troops Gates has said are needed in Afghanistan, will supposedly, theoretically, encourage the Allies after more than 6 years. As we're considering digging even deeper to make up for the shortfall in Afghanistan, Pentagon spokesman Geoff Morrell said, we would expect our allies in the fight to do the same. Many Europeans believe that the United States committed attention and resources to Iraq at Afghanistan's expense, but U.S. officials say the problems of NATO countries in Afghanistan have roots in not investing sufficiently, supposedly, in their militaries after the Cold War. Canada, U.S. officials say, for instance, needs American military airlift for its troops in Afghanistan because it got rid of a fleet of heavy lift helicopters. At the same time that they want more from their partners, however, U.S. defense officials often disdain their abilities. No one, they insist, is as good at counterinsurgency as the U.S. military. That's nice. U.S. and British forces have long derided each other's counterinsurgency tactics. A colonial attitude. The same tensions have emerged in Afghanistan, where U.S. officials criticized what one called a colonial attitude that kept the British from retaining control over areas wrested from the Taliban, or taken from the Taliban. Disagreement leaked out publicly early last year when British troops withdrew from the Musa Qala district of Helmand after striking a deal with local tribal leaders. The tribal chiefs quickly relinquished control to the Taliban. Britain, with a higher percentage of its forces deployed worldwide, and the United States is stretched thin in Afghanistan. Not only did the British have insufficient force strength to hold conquered territory, but the reconstruction and development assistance that was supposed to consolidate military gains did not arrive. It's worth reminding the Americans that the entire British Army is smaller than the U.S. Marine Corps, said one sympathetic former U.S. commander in Afghanistan. U.S. officials in Afghanistan, led by Ambassador William B. Wood, have insisted that the current strategy of manually destroying opium fields is ineffective and have pressed to begin aerial spraying of herbicide. The Afghans don't want that. The Afghan president said he has formally ruled it out over U.S. objections, but the government's preferred method of manual eradication, sending Afghan troops and police to pull poppy plants out of the ground, has faltered because of poor security. UN Secretary General says he sees a worsening situation in Afghanistan day by day. These are more signs of the last days, end times, and there are many of them.